The autumn chill of a Massachusetts October had just begun to deepen the colors of the hydrangeas outside Eleanor Vance's sunroom, yet the warmth of the afternoon sun, filtering through the ivory curtains, made the cozy space feel like a refuge. At 72, Eleanor still possessed a quiet grace, her silver hair neatly pinned, and her movements precise, remnants of her 30 years as a beloved high school English teacher in the greater Boston area. She was reading The Goldfinch, one of her late husband's favorites, sipping Earl Grey tea. Her life was simple now, but rich with the memories that lined the walls of her split-level home in Newton, pictures of her late husband, Robert, their cruises to Alaska, and, most prominently, dozens of photographs chronicling the life of their only child, David. David. Her heart swelled with pride every time she thought of him. He was 45 now, a sharp, ambitious man who had recently transitioned into a high-level executive role at a mid-sized tech consulting firm in Cambridge. He lived close by with his wife, Jessica, and their two teenage children. David was everything a mother could wish for: attentive, successful, and always ensuring his mother felt loved and secure. After Robert passed away 5 years ago, it was David who had insisted on setting up her financial affairs, consolidating her teacher's pension, the modest life insurance payout, and the inheritance from her own parents into a few secure instruments, mostly certificates of deposit, CDs, and a highly protected high-yield savings account, totaling just over $150,000. "You worked hard for this, Mum," he had said, his face earnest. "I'll make sure it grows safely for you. You just worry about enjoying your books and your garden." And Jessica, her daughter-in-law. Jessica was a gem. At 42, she was stylish, energetic, and endlessly patient. She was the one who remembered Eleanor's appointment dates, who coordinated the Sunday dinners, and who insisted on bringing over gourmet coffee whenever she visited. She had an administrative job that kept her busy, but she always made time for Eleanor. Just last week, Jessica had meticulously organized Eleanor's medicine cabinet, labeling everything and even creating a neatly typed schedule for her vitamins. Eleanor often told her friends, "I am blessed. David and Jessica treat me like gold." But 3 weeks ago, that comfortable peace was shattered. Eleanor was watering her prized roses when a sudden, blinding headache hit her, followed by a dizzying disorientation. She remembered the ground rushing up to meet her face, a sharp pain in her hip, and then nothing but a strange, dark silence. She was later told she had suffered a severe vasovagal syncope, a sudden drop in heart rate and blood pressure, causing her to lose consciousness and fall heavily. The next memory was waking up in the glaring, sterile white of a hospital room, David and Jessica hovering over her, their faces etched with what seemed like genuine terror and exhaustion. She had spent 5 days in the hospital, the first 24 hours in the intensive care unit, ICU, just for monitoring due to the severity of the fall and a brief period of unconsciousness. David and Jessica had been models of devotion. They stayed by her bedside in the ICU waiting room, rotating shifts to ensure one of them was always present. When she was moved to a general ward at the prestigious Massachusetts General Hospital, MGH, they continued their vigil. Jessica brought her warm blankets and the latest magazines, reading the headlines to her, and David held her hand, whispering words of encouragement. "We were so scared, Mom," David had choked out, his eyes glistening. We thought we lost you." Eleanor felt a profound love and gratitude that her husband had entrusted her to such caring hands. She was released, bruised, medicated for her hip pain, but otherwise well, with a prescription for rest. Life quickly settled back into its rhythm, albeit a slower one. Eleanor was home, recovering, her days filled with short walks around the house and endless episodes of her favorite British mysteries. The telephone rang sharply on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Eleanor was dozing off in the sunroom. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. MGH Security Office. A strange jolt of alarm went through her. Hospitals only called back if there was a problem. She picked up. "Hello, this is Eleanor Vance." The voice on the other end was deep, professional, and unusually cautious, tinged with a thick Boston accent. "Mrs. Vance, this is Mr. Harrison. I'm the Director of Security here at MGH. I apologize for calling you directly, but I need to speak with you about your recent stay." "Oh, certainly. Is there an issue with my bill, or—" "No, Mrs. Vance, nothing like that. It's regarding the security footage from the ICU, specifically the night you were admitted. We had an internal reporting irregularity concerning an item. I've reviewed the tapes personally, and there's something I believe you need to see in person." Eleanor's grip tightened on the receiver. "See? What on earth could be on the tapes, Mr. Harrison?" His voice dropped, becoming an urgent, low murmur. "Mrs. Vance, this is crucial. You need to come alone. Do not, under any circumstances, mention this call to your son, David, or your daughter-in-law, Jessica. I understand this sounds strange, but it's vital to your well-being that they remain completely unaware of this meeting. When can you come?" The blood drained from Eleanor's face. The polite professional veneer had cracked, revealing a serious, almost alarming demand. "Don't tell David or Jessica." Why? They were the ones who had saved her, the ones who had been her rock. What could possibly be on the security tapes from her own room that involved a reporting irregularity and required such cloak-and-dagger secrecy regarding her own family? I I can come this afternoon. Say, 4 o'clock?" She managed to choke out. 4 o'clock is perfect. Come to the main security desk, located just past the main lobby near the gift shop. Ask for Mr. Harrison. I'll make sure you are taken directly to my private office. And Mrs. Vance." He paused, his voice firming one last time. "Remember my instruction. Alone." Eleanor hung up, her hand shaking so badly she had to grip her other arm to steady herself. The peaceful warmth of the sunroom suddenly felt oppressive. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She tried to rationalize. Maybe a piece of expensive medical equipment was stolen, and they needed her to confirm her room's status. Maybe it was a minor HIPAA violation regarding a nurse taking a picture. But then the icy logic of Mr. Harrison's command cut through her attempts at denial. "Don't tell your son or daughter-in-law." If it was a simple theft or violation, why the dramatic secrecy involving the two people she trusted most in the world? A sickening knot formed in her stomach. She felt the ground shifting beneath her, transforming her cozy, secure world into something treacherous and unknown. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked loudly, mocking the agonizingly slow passage of time. She couldn't focus on her book. She couldn't even bring herself to watch her television. The words, "Don't tell your son," echoed relentlessly. She felt a desperate need to talk to someone, but David called around noon, asking how she was feeling. "Oh, I'm fine, darling," she said, her voice sounding falsely cheerful. "Just resting." "Good. Jessica and I were thinking of bringing over some clam chowder later. You need to keep your strength up, Mum." "That sounds lovely," Eleanor lied, the innocent domesticity of the plan making her feel instantly guilty, as if she were the one plotting something sinister. She certainly couldn't say, "Actually, I'm going to MGH this afternoon because the security director says I need to see a video of the night I was unconscious, and he specifically warned me not to tell you." She hung up, feeling like a spy in her own home. She had to know. The uncertainty was a corrosive acid eating away at her peace. At 3:30, she put on a simple grey cashmere sweater, it was getting cool out, and a pair of sensible black pants. She avoided looking at the photos of David lining the hall, David graduating high school, David at their wedding, David hugging her at her last birthday. Each photo felt like a judgment, a silent question mark over the man she thought she knew. The drive to Boston was a blur of nervous anxiety. Every red light was an unbearable torture, prolonging the moment of confrontation. She mentally rehearsed scenarios. It's an accidental recording of a nurse talking about her private life. It's a mix-up. But the pit in her stomach knew better. Her deepest, most primal maternal instinct, the one that had protected her child for decades, was screaming a warning. MGH, usually a bustling, chaotic hub of activity, felt strangely imposing and quiet as she walked through the main doors. She found the security desk easily. Mr. Harrison was exactly where he said he would be. He was a tall man, early 50s, with tired eyes and impeccably neat grey hair, the picture of professional gravitas. His serious expression confirmed her worst fears. He didn't offer a cheerful greeting, only a formal, almost sorrowful handshake. "Mrs. Vance, thank you for coming." His voice was low and discreet. "Follow me, please." He led her through a maze of back hallways and restricted access areas until they reached a small, windowless office dominated by a desk and several large computer monitors, displaying real-time feeds from various hospital cameras. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, insulated from the rest of the hospital. Eleanor sat down, her knees suddenly weak. "Mr. Harrison, please, what is this about?" He sat opposite her, his hands folded on the desk, not quite meeting her eyes. "Mrs. Vance, I need you to understand something. We rarely review surveillance footage unless something is reported missing or there's an incident. 3 days ago, one of my night shift technicians noticed something highly irregular on a random spot check of the ICU corridor feed from 3 weeks ago. When I saw it, I knew I had to call you directly despite the risk to my protocol." Eleanor's breath hitched. "What was it?" Mr. Harrison inhaled sharply. "It directly involves you, and the two people you trust the most." He turned the main monitor toward her. The screen was sterile, a standard interface displaying an ICU floor plan and a video playback window. "The recordings I'm about to show you are from two specific times. The first is a static shot of a restricted staff area near the nurses' station shortly after you were admitted. The second is the most difficult. It's from a camera inside your private ICU room." Eleanor wanted to scream, to run, but she was frozen, trapped by a paralyzing dread. Mr. Harrison moved his mouse, clicking on a file labeled Vance Admission 10-04-1430. Corridor. The screen lit up, showing a dimly lit hallway. The date and timestamp confirmed it was shortly after she had been wheeled into the ICU. And then they walked into the frame. David and Jessica. They were standing close together, their backs to the wall, talking in low, intense voices. David looked anxious, but Jessica looked calculating. "Play the audio," Mr. Harrison instructed the computer, his voice barely a whisper. The audio quality was surprisingly crisp, cutting through the hospital's faint background hum. Jessica, voice cold, businesslike. "He wants us to move it now, David, while she's out cold. Stop looking like a frightened child. This is the perfect window." David, voice strained, agitated. "But Jess, it's not right. And what about the security? That whole $150,000 is tied up in that high-yield CD, and she uses the biometric lock on the iPad. We only have the 4-digit passcode we got when we admitted her. Jessica scoffs, an ugly, arrogant sound. The passcode is for the main screen. The biometric is for the bank app, yes. But David, she's not conscious. We're in the ICU. Nobody questions the devoted son and daughter-in-law. We'll just use her fingerprint. David, a miserable whimper. What if she wakes up? What if the nurses see? Jessica. They won't. I'll get her iPad from her purse. You stand guard. We'll tell everyone we were praying. We need that $50,000 for the down payment, and we need it before she wakes up and gets chatty with the bank about her medical situation. She trusts us implicitly. You know she does. The audio cut out. The office was silent. Eleanor couldn't breathe. Her ears were ringing. Use her fingerprint. She trusts us implicitly. We need that $50,000 for the down payment. It wasn't a bad loan or an accidental overspending. It was a calculated, premeditated theft, planned while she was fighting for her life. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her gasping for air. Mrs. Vance, are you all right? Mr. Harrison reached across the desk, looking alarmed. She held up a trembling hand, tears streaming down her face, falling silently onto her cashmere sweater. The sheer, monstrous cruelty of the betrayal was paralyzing. Her son, the boy she had sacrificed her 20s to raise after her first husband left, and her daughter-in-law, the woman she considered the daughter she never had, were not saving her life. They were looting her financial safety net while she lay unconscious. The second tape, Mrs. Vance. You need to see the second tape. Mr. Harrison spoke with a quiet urgency. He clicked on the next file. Vance, ICU, room 1004-1515. The screen instantly displayed a view of her ICU room. There she was, lying frail and utterly still in the sterile white bed, a nasal cannula delivering oxygen, the cardiac monitor showing her slow, steady rhythm. The picture of absolute helplessness. The timestamp scrolled. David was visible first, standing near the door, his head bowed. He looked like the picture of a concerned son, occasionally rubbing his temples in a show of distress. Then Jessica entered the frame. She walked straight to a small table where Eleanor's purse had been placed by the nurse. She looked quickly at David, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Jessica opened the purse, pulled out a small metallic object, Eleanor's iPad, and quickly moved out of the camera's main view near the head of the bed. The camera, however, caught the movement. Jessica gently lifted Eleanor's left arm. With chilling, professional precision, she pressed Eleanor's thumb onto the screen. It took 2 tries. Then, the screen unlocked. For the next 3 minutes, Jessica was a blur of focused, rapid movement, her face inches from the screen. She was obviously navigating the complex banking apps. David remained by the door, occasionally glancing toward the door, then back to his wife, his facade of grief never cracking. Once the transaction was complete, Jessica gently placed the iPad back into the purse, smoothed the wrinkles from the blanket covering Eleanor's arm, and rejoined David. She gave him a small, tight, almost triumphant smile. David didn't smile back. He just nodded, his anxiety receding, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. They were no longer the concerned relatives. They were accomplices in a crime. The video ended. The office lights automatically came back up, revealing the devastation on Eleanor's face. "We ran the timestamp against the bank's records immediately," Mr. Harrison said, his voice quiet and empathetic. "The transaction logged at that exact time was an ACH transfer of $50,000 from your high-yield CD to a joint checking account opened last month under the names David Debitant and Jessica Vance. $50,000, Eleanor whispered, the number meaningless compared to the utter destruction of her reality. I have already contacted our internal legal team, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Harrison continued, handing her a box of tissues. This evidence is irrefutable. It is a clear case of financial exploitation of the elderly and a felony theft, compounded by the violation of a sacred trust. Eleanor couldn't speak. She felt hollowed out, as if all her internal organs had been replaced by ash. The memory of David holding her hand, of Jessica reading to her, it wasn't love. It was control, surveillance, and a chilling assurance that their victim was helpless. Why? Eleanor finally managed, the word a ragged sound. Why would they do this? I would have given them the money if they had only asked. They couldn't afford to ask, Mrs. Vance. Asking would mean explaining why they needed the money, exposing their financial state, and perhaps risking a rejection. They chose the path of no resistance, the path of exploitation, believing that by the time you noticed the money was gone, they could simply blame bank error or confusion during your illness. His words were cold, hard facts that pierced the last vestiges of her denial. I haven't checked my account since I got home, Eleanor admitted, her head throbbing. I never suspected anything. That is exactly what they banked on, Mr. Harrison said gently. They rely on the victim's love and the fundamental inability to believe their own child is capable of such an act. Mr. Harrison gave her the next steps. Immediately contact her bank to freeze all accounts, file a formal police report for the video evidence, and, most importantly, get an attorney specializing in elder fraud. She left MGH in a daze, the city traffic a roaring monster she barely navigated. She couldn't go home yet. The thought of that house, filled with David's childhood photos and Jessica's meticulous labels, felt contaminated. She drove aimlessly for an hour until she found herself parked outside the familiar, slightly weathered home of her dearest friend, Martha. Martha, a fiercely loyal woman with a sharp wit, had been Eleanor's neighbor and best friend for 30 years and was David's godmother. If there was anyone who could understand the depth of this betrayal, it was Martha. Eleanor stumbled out of the car and rang the doorbell, collapsing into Martha's arms the moment the door opened. Eleanor, what on earth? You're white as a ghost. Eleanor sobbed, the tears that had been silent in the security office now pouring out in ragged, heaving gasps that came from the very core of her being. She told Martha everything, every chilling detail from Mr. Harrison's office, the cold plan, the clinical use of her own hand. Martha listened in horrified silence, her face growing rigid with shock and then hardening into fury. Those monsters! After all you've done for David, the man who was practically raised at my kitchen table, he was saving her fingerprint. He was using your unconscious body as an ATM. Martha's righteous anger was the first tangible comfort Eleanor had felt. It confirmed that she wasn't crazy, that the monstrous reality she had witnessed was as real and despicable as it felt. I need to protect myself, Martha, Eleanor finally said, wiping her face. I'm going to follow Mr. Harrison's advice, but I need to do more. I need to let them know I know. Not quietly, not privately. I need to destroy their facade. Good, Martha said, her eyes blazing. You have to take back your dignity. They used your love as a weapon. Now you use their own arrogance against them. Over the next few days, Eleanor and Martha worked in secret. Eleanor spoke with her bank, freezing the accounts and filing the fraud report, the bank representative's voice full of sympathy, but also professional caution about the difficulty of prosecuting family fraud. She then hired Charles Lynn, a no-nonsense attorney who specialized in financial crime. When he reviewed the MGH footage, his face remained neutral, but his voice was grave. Mrs. Vance, this evidence is a prosecutor's dream. Premeditation, execution during a period of extreme vulnerability, and clear intent to steal. We will file both criminal charges and a civil suit for restitution and emotional damages. But Eleanor wasn't satisfied with the slow grind of the legal process. David and Jessica were still messaging her, asking her to lunch, pretending everything was normal. David, text message. Mum, I miss you. Thinking of you. Send me a selfie. Love you. The word love was a caustic burn. Jessica, email. Dear Eleanor, David and I were talking about how happy we are you're recovering. We told the kids what a fighter you are. We're so blessed to have you in our lives. Eleanor decided on her course of action, a plan that would give her the closure she desperately needed. I want to host a party, Eleanor told Martha and Charles Lynn. Not a quiet little dinner, a big event. I'm calling it my rebirth party, a celebration of life after my near-death experience. I want David, Jessica, all their friends, their business associates, everyone who thinks they are this perfect, devoted couple, to be there. Martha's eyes widened. Eleanor, that's bold. You'll be confronting them in public. Exactly, Eleanor said, a cold steel replacing the usual softness in her voice. They used a false act of care to rob me. I will use a false act of celebration to expose them. Mr. Lynn cautioned her about the emotional toll, but Eleanor was resolute. There is no toll greater than the one I've already paid. My relationship with my son is already dead. This is the funeral. She sent out the formal invitations. The date was set for the following Saturday at the opulent Colonial Hills Country Club in Weston, the same club where David was trying desperately to climb the social and business ladder. Eleanor called David. Darling, she chirped, using a saccharine tone that made her skin crawl. I've been planning my rebirth party. I want to celebrate my life, and I especially want to thank the two people who were by my side in the hospital. David's voice, initially surprised, quickly turned to eager delight. Mom, that's wonderful. That's so like you. Yes, we'd be honored. Colonial Hills is a fantastic choice. He never suspected a thing. His arrogance shielded him completely. Eleanor spent the next few days meticulously coordinating the event with the club manager, ensuring the private dining room had a large, state-of-the-art projector and screen. Mr. Harrison worked with her lawyer to prepare a high-quality, edited version of the MGH security footage, ensuring the timestamps and audio were crystal clear for maximum impact. Eleanor chose a stunning deep sapphire evening gown. She looked beautiful, composed, and absolutely terrifying. Her face showed no sign of the turmoil beneath. She was no longer the soft, naive former teacher. She was a woman wronged, preparing to strike back. On the night of the party, Eleanor, Martha, and Charles Lynn arrived early. The private dining room was set for 60 guests. The attendees, David's business contacts, Jessica's social friends, and Eleanor's genuine loved ones, began to filter in. David and Jessica arrived last, beaming, dressed in expensive attire, accepting compliments left and right about their tireless devotion to Eleanor during her illness. David approached his mother, pulling her into a warm hug. Mom, you look incredible. We're so proud of you. This is a magnificent idea. Eleanor returned the embrace with the minimal force required, the physical contact feeling like an electric shock. Thank you, David. I couldn't have done it without you. Her words, once genuine, were now heavy with a double meaning that only she understood. Jessica presented her with an expensive, beautifully wrapped gift, a cashmere shawl. To keep you warm on your long walks, Eleanor. You deserve all the peace in the world. Eleanor accepted the gift with a brittle smile. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate your thoughts so much. The evening proceeded through cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. David and Jessica mingled effortlessly, basking in the glow of false admiration. Eleanor watched them, her expression serene, observing their performance with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing specimens. Finally, after the main course had been cleared, Eleanor stood up, tapping her glass lightly with a dessert spoon. The room quieted, all eyes turning to the radiant, silver-haired matriarch. Friends, family, thank you for coming to celebrate with me, Eleanor began, her voice steady and resonant, carrying easily across the room. As you all know, I recently had a very serious health scare. I was moments away from death, and I spent a terrifying night in the ICU. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy. David smiled beatifically, leaning back in his chair, ready for the tribute. I owe my recovery, and frankly my life, to the incredible care I received from the doctors and nurses at MGH, she continued. But mostly, I owe my strength to the love of my family, particularly my son, David, and my dear daughter-in-law, Jessica. David gave a humble, modest nod. Jessica put her hand on his arm, the picture of wifely support. But tonight, Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a new, hard edge that made Martha exchange a quick glance with Charles Lynn, is not just about thanks. It is about honesty. You see, when you have a near-death experience, you see the world clearly. You realize who truly loves you and who is simply waiting for you to die. The room stiffened. David's smile faltered. Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly, a tiny spark of professional worry appearing in her gaze. David, Eleanor addressed her son directly, her voice cutting through the silence like ice. Jessica, when you were praying by my bedside, you were actually committing a heinous crime against an unconscious elderly woman who trusted you completely. Chaos erupted immediately. David shot up, knocking his chair backward. Mom, what are you talking about? Are you confused? Your medication? I am perfectly clear, David. Eleanor spat out the words, her control absolute. And I have the receipts. She reached down and pulled a small, professional-looking remote control from the fold of her napkin. The lights in the dining room dimmed automatically. The large screen on the far wall flickered to life. The Massachusetts General Hospital Security Department was kind enough to provide me with the evidence I needed. Evidence of financial exploitation of the elderly. The first video played. The corridor conversation. David and Jessica's faces, large and clear on the screen, discussing their plan, their voices amplified through the room's sound system. He wants us to move it now, David. We'll just use her fingerprint. We need that $50,000 for the down payment, and we need it before she wakes up. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the cold, calculating words of the conspirators. Gasps echoed through the crowd of business associates and friends. David stood frozen, his face a sickening shade of grey. Jessica looked toward the door, her eyes wide with a calculating terror. Eleanor didn't give them a moment to recover. She clicked the remote again. The screen switched to the ICU room video. The crowd watched in horror as the camera showed Eleanor's helpless form, then Jessica's professional, quick movements, retrieving the iPad, the chilling use of the unconscious woman's own hand, the rapid tapping on the screen. David stood guard, looking on, complicit. When the video finished, the screen went black and the lights snapped back on. The Colonial Hills Country Club dining room, usually a setting for genteel decorum, was now a scene of utter, humiliating destruction. $50,000, Eleanor said, her voice shaking slightly now, but still commanding the room. You stole $50,000 from my life savings, David, while I lay unconscious and helpless. You used the love and trust I gave you as a mask for your greed. Martha, David's godmother, was the first to act. She marched up to David, grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive suit, and shook him. I carried you to the baptismal font. Your mother gave you everything. You are a disgrace to your father's name. David, cornered, started to blubber, tears of panic and humiliation streaming down his face. Mom, it was a mistake. We were desperate. I can pay it back. Please, Mom. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, made a dash for the door, but Charles Lynn, the attorney, stepped calmly into her path. Miss Vance, Mr. Lynn said in a calm, flat tone, I advise you to remain. The police are on their way. My client has filed criminal charges. We have the video evidence, the MGH testimony, and the bank transaction records confirming the $50,000 transfer to your joint account. Jessica stared at him, her defiance cracking. You can't do this. He's her son. The law calls him a criminal, Eleanor said, walking up to David, who was still gasping. She looked him in the eyes that had mirrored her own decades ago, and saw only a stranger consumed by self-pity and greed. David, you asked me for my forgiveness, but you don't regret the crime. You regret being caught, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a heartbreaking finality. The David I loved, the one I sacrificed for, that man never existed. He died that night in the ICU. From the back of the room, two officers in plain clothes, who had been discreetly positioned at the attorney's request, approached the table. David Vance, Jessica Vance, you are under arrest for larceny over $1,200 and financial exploitation of an elderly person. As the officers cuffed them, David cried out one last time, Mom, don't let them do this. We're family. Eleanor stood tall, her sapphire dress gleaming under the chandelier. Family is the people who stand by you, David, not the ones who steal your dignity while you are fighting for your life. She watched them being led away, out of the opulent room, past their shocked and horrified friends. As the door closed, Eleanor felt an unimaginable, profound sorrow, the loss of a child she had carried for 45 years. But beneath the sorrow, a sharp, clean sense of victory and liberation. Her old life was destroyed, but her dignity was fiercely intact. The party, meant to celebrate a life saved, had become the battlefield where her true rebirth began. The silence in the dining room of the Colonial Hills Country Club was a thick, suffocating blanket after the officers led David and Jessica Vance away. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, but the sound of the handcuffs, the desperate plea in David's voice, and the icy, calculated cadence of the security footage lingered in the air, echoing in the space where laughter and polite conversation that had only moments before reigned. Eleanor remained standing at the head of the table, her sapphire gown shimmering, but her body felt hollow, like a bell that had rung its final, devastating toll. She had delivered the blow, exposed the truth, and achieved the public reckoning she had craved, yet the victory tasted like ash. Her dignity was intact, yes, but at the cost of the last 45 years of her life, the destruction of a bond she had built with every ounce of sacrifice she possessed. Martha, her dearest friend, was the first to move. She rushed to Eleanor's side, her face pale but her eyes fierce. Eleanor, darling. Oh my God. Come, sit down. You were magnificent. A lioness. Martha wrapped her arms tightly around Eleanor. For the first time since the phone call from Mr. Harrison, Eleanor allowed herself to truly crumble. She didn't sob. She simply shook, a deep internal tremor that vibrated through her bones. The composure she had maintained for the last hour, the steel she had found to execute the plan, dissolved, leaving her utterly spent. Charles Lynn, her attorney, moved with the quiet efficiency of a man used to handling crises. He spoke in a low voice to the club manager, who was standing rooted in shock, his face a mix of disbelief and professional horror. "Sir, please ask your staff to discreetly guide the remaining guests out. Explain that this was a family emergency that has been resolved." Lynn then turned to the assembled crowd, which mostly consisted of David's high-profile business associates and a few close friends of Eleanor's. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Lynn announced, his voice carrying authority, "we apologize for the abrupt conclusion to this evening. Mrs. Vance has faced a profound personal crisis involving criminal financial exploitation. The matter is now in the hands of the Newton Police Department and the District Attorney's Office. We thank you for your respect for Mrs. Vance's privacy during this difficult time. The evening is concluded." The guests, a collection of wealthy, image-conscious Bostonians, didn't need a second prompt. They gathered their coats and their stunned silence and flowed out of the dining room, desperate to escape the scene of the scandal. They were witnesses to a drama more brutal and intimate than anything they had ever read in a society column. The whispers that followed David and Jessica Vance out of that room, Eleanor knew, would be more punishing than any initial incarceration. Within minutes, the vast dining room was almost empty. Only Eleanor, Martha, Mr. Lynn, and a small, fiercely loyal group of Eleanor's oldest friends remained. They formed a silent circle around Eleanor as she slowly lowered herself onto a chair, the effort draining her. "I need to go home," Eleanor whispered, the sound raw and fragile. "You're not going home alone, dear heart," Martha declared firmly. "You are coming straight to my house. I'll make you a hot toddy, and we will talk through this until the sun comes up. I won't let you be alone in that house tonight. Not after seeing all those photos of that viper." Mr. Lynn nodded in agreement. "I concur, Mrs. Vance. Emotional and physical safety are paramount now. I will ensure the police report is processed tonight, and I will be at the courthouse first thing tomorrow morning for the arraignment hearing. I need you to focus only on rest." "The money," Eleanor murmured, lifting her gaze to her lawyer. "The $50,000. It's a secondary concern right now, but we are addressing it," Lynn assured her. "Since the transfer was recent and clearly unauthorized, we have a strong chance of recovering most, if not all of it, through bank fraud protection and the civil suit. The video evidence is the cornerstone of our case. David and Jessica will be ordered to pay full restitution, regardless of the criminal outcome." Eleanor didn't feel relief, only a cold detachment. The money wasn't the point. It was the principle, the absolute violation of a mother's faith. Later that night, curled up in Martha's guest room with a heavy quilt around her, Eleanor stared at the ceiling, unable to close her eyes. Martha sat beside her, simply holding her hand, a presence of steady, unwavering loyalty. "Did I do the right thing, Martha?" Eleanor asked, her voice small, almost childlike. "Exposing him like that? Subjecting him to that humiliation?" "Yes, Eleanor. You did the only thing you could do," Martha stated, her grip tightening. "You showed them that you are not weak. You stood up to a lifetime of entitlement and arrogance. That boy, my godson, always thought he was untouchable. You, his gentle mother, taught him the hardest lesson. Actions have consequences, and love is not a license for theft. If you had gone quietly, he would have done it again, to you or to someone else. You saved yourself and perhaps saved some other poor soul from his greed. Martha's words were the anchor Eleanor needed, rooting her in the brutal truth. The following morning brought the cold, harsh light of reality. Mr. Lynn called from the courthouse. David and Jessica had been arraigned. Their defense attorney, a slick, expensive lawyer hired on retainer by David's increasingly panicked company, who were already distancing themselves, was trying to argue that the $50,000 was a gift and that Eleanor was medically confused due to her recent illness. Mr. Lynn quickly countered with the MGH security footage, which was immediately sealed as key evidence. Bail was set high, reflecting the seriousness of the charge of exploiting a vulnerable senior. David was released under strict conditions. Jessica remained briefly in custody until her company's legal team arranged for her release. Eleanor insisted on going home that afternoon, accompanied by Martha. Walking back into her house felt surreal. The familiar scent of wood polish and old books, the soft, muted colours, it was all the same, yet fundamentally different. It was the scene of the crime. She walked straight to the living room, to the large wall of photographs. David at his college graduation, beaming in his cap and gown. David on his 10th birthday, blowing out candles. David embracing her at Robert's funeral, looking so sincere. Martha watched her, waiting for the inevitable emotional breakdown. But Eleanor didn't break. She simply walked slowly along the wall, touching each photograph with the tips of her fingers, an expression of clinical, detached grief on her face. "I spent my entire adult life building up this man," Eleanor murmured, her voice flat. "Working double shifts, using my summers to tutor, teaching evening classes after Robert passed, just so he could have the best education, the best opportunities. I told myself I was giving him a stable, loving foundation. But I see now I gave him entitlement. I taught him that he could always rely on me to fix his problems, and eventually, that I was merely a resource to be exploited when his own efforts failed." She stopped at a picture of David and Jessica's wedding day, their faces radiating happiness. She was the catalyst. He was weak and entitled. She was calculating and cold. Together, they were a perfect engine of greed. Eleanor turned to Martha. "We need to clear this room. I can't live surrounded by a lie." That afternoon, Eleanor and Martha began the grim task of dismantling a lifetime of memories. They didn't throw anything away, but they packed it all. The photographs, the framed diplomas, the children's artwork David had given her, into sturdy cardboard boxes. They covered the empty spaces on the walls with simple, abstract pieces of art Eleanor had collected over the years. Art that celebrated color and form rather than history and lineage. The transformation was subtle but profound. The room became less a shrine to her son and more a gallery of her own taste, her own identity, separate from her role as mother. The ensuing weeks were a blur of practical, essential activities. Eleanor met almost daily with Mr. Lynn. They built the case, securing testimony from Mr. Harrison at MGH and from several guests at the disastrous party, including David's own business associates, whose testimony would prove devastating to his character defense. The scandal quickly spread through the close-knit financial community of Boston, and David's consulting firm immediately placed him on an indefinite, unpaid leave of absence. Jessica was quietly terminated from her administrative position a week later. Eleanor also made an urgent, important call. She contacted her sister, Clara, who lived in Arizona. Clara, 3 years younger, was the pragmatic, fiercely independent one. When Eleanor told her the story, Clara's reaction was immediate and incandescent. "That viper!" Clara roared over the phone. "After all you did, missing vacations, wearing the same coat for 10 years so he could have private school. I'm flying out tomorrow, Eleanor. I need to hug you, and then I need to start organizing your life. No discussion. Clara arrived the next day, her presence a whirlwind of practical competence. She helped Eleanor change all the locks, install a new security system that required biometric and verbal codes only she knew, and most importantly, she went through Eleanor's finances with a fine-tooth comb. He was sloppy, thank God, Clara observed after reviewing the bank statements. He didn't just make one clean withdrawal. There were multiple small ATM withdrawals over the last 6 months, usually $500 or $1,000 at a time. Nothing major, but enough to show a pattern of consistent, low-level financial bleed, proving this wasn't just a desperate, one-time mistake, as his lawyer is claiming. He and Jessica were already living off your generosity, even before the big score. This detail was a fresh stab of pain. The calculated, prolonged exploitations was far more agonizing than the single sudden theft. David had been treating her like an invisible bank for months. Clara also insisted Eleanor begin therapy. This is a trauma, Eleanor. You experienced a violation of the most basic trust. You need professional help to process the grief of losing a child who is still alive. Eleanor reluctantly agreed. Her first few sessions with Dr. Anya Sharma, a trauma psychologist specializing in family abuse, were devastating. Eleanor spent hours weeping, recounting the sacrifices, the unconditional love, and the profound confusion. Mrs. Vance, we need to reframe this narrative, Dr. Sharma said gently in one session. You did not fail as a mother. You were generous, loving, and sacrificial. Your son and daughter-in-law exploited those qualities. They chose to be criminals. You are not responsible for their moral choices. Dr. Sharma helped Eleanor understand the concept of the narcissistic contract, the unwritten agreement where the entitled child views the parent solely as an extension of their needs, believing they are owed everything. David's crime was the ultimate expression of this entitlement. She never uses the money, it's just sitting there. The therapy was a slow, painful process of intellectualizing the betrayal while allowing the grief to flow. Eleanor learned that true forgiveness did not mean reconciliation or excusing the crime. It meant releasing her own bitterness so she could move forward, allowing justice to be the consequence. The legal battle dragged on. David's lawyer employed every tactic, delaying hearings, attempting to discredit Mr. Harrison's testimony, and offering pathetic-sounding settlements, always conditional on Eleanor dropping the criminal charges. They want to buy back your silence and your loyalty, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Lynn warned her. They want to save David's career more than they want to apologize to you. Do not take the bait. Eleanor remained resolute. No, the criminal charges stand. Let him face the consequences of his actions. I will not trade justice for convenience. The bank, supported by Mr. Lynn's aggressive filing, managed to freeze and recover $45,000 of the stolen $50,000 before it was disbursed. The remaining $5,000 had been immediately spent on a down payment for a luxury car lease David had arranged the week before Eleanor's syncope. The money was gone, but the principal remained. 6 months after the rebirth party, a pre-trial hearing was held. Eleanor had to appear in the same room as David and Jessica. She was accompanied by Mr. Lynn and Clara. David looked haggard, his suit rumpled, his face showing the strain of the legal and social fallout. He tried to catch her eye, his expression a theatrical mix of sorrow and appeal. Jessica, however, met her gaze with a flash of cold, calculating hatred, a look that confirmed everything Eleanor had suspected about her ruthless nature. Eleanor kept her eyes forward, maintaining a rigid, dignified composure. The prosecutor, armed with the MGH video and Mr. Harrison's damning testimony presented the case. The defense continued to argue gift and confusion. The judge, an experienced jurist, summarized the situation. The court has reviewed the undisputed video evidence showing the two defendants discussing the premeditated use of the victim's unconscious state and her biometric data to fraudulently access funds. This is a severe breach of trust and a clear case of financial exploitation. The argument of gift is entirely unsupportable. The judge ordered that the case proceed to a full jury trial. David and Jessica were formally charged with multiple felonies. The realization that her son was now facing years in a state prison was a source of profound, sickening sorrow. But it was a sorrow Eleanor had to carry, not shield him from. Meanwhile, Eleanor slowly began the process of rebuilding her life, no longer defined by the role of the devoted mother who sacrificed everything. She sold the Newton house, which was too big and too laden with toxic memories. She bought a charming, smaller condominium in a more urban area of Boston, near the Symphony Hall and the Museum of Fine Arts. The new space was bright, modern, and entirely free of David's presence. She enrolled in an art history course at a local university, rekindling a passion for the Renaissance she had put aside decades ago. She joined a book club, a real book club, unlike the one Jessica had organized for her, and found genuine companionship with intellectual, witty women her age. She started dating again, albeit cautiously. She met a kind, retired architect named Edward, who treated her with respect and was genuinely interested in her life and her mind, not her bank balance. Martha remained her unshakable pillar of support, visiting weekly, and Clara flew out every few months, ensuring Eleanor maintained her financial discipline and security protocols. A year after the confrontation, the trial finally began. Eleanor was required to testify. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Sitting in the witness stand, with David and Jessica watching from the defense table, she had to recount the events, the planning, and the discovery. The prosecutor asked the final devastating question. Mrs. Vance, how has the defendant's act affected you? Eleanor took a deep breath, looking not at David, but directly at the jury, 6 men and 6 women who had followed her story with grim attention. They stole more than money, she said, her voice clear and strong. They stole my sense of reality. They stole my peace of mind. They forced me to question every single happy memory I had with my son, wondering if the love was real or if it was just a prolonged act of manipulation. They made me feel like an object, a bank account, not a mother. And that is a wound that may never heal. David broke down sobbing, a dramatic performance the jury watched with skepticism. The jury deliberated for 3 days. The verdict, read by the foreman, was a resounding, absolute affirmation of Eleanor's fight for justice. Guilty on all counts of larceny and financial exploitation of the elderly. The courtroom was silent. David slumped into his chair, utterly defeated. Jessica's face remained surprisingly blank, but her hand clutched her defense attorney's arm with white-knuckled desperation. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, the judge, citing the premeditation, the use of a medical crisis, and the profound breach of trust, sentenced David Vance to 8 years in a state prison, with the possibility of parole after 4. Jessica received a slightly lighter sentence of 6 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution of the remaining $5,000, plus compensatory damages to Eleanor. When the judge's gavel struck, Eleanor felt no elation, only a deep, cleansing sense of completion. The chapter was closed, justice had been served, but the cost to her soul remained immense. Today, nearly 2 years after the trial, Eleanor is flourishing. She sold the condominium and bought a beautiful townhome closer to her new group of friends. She and Edward, the architect, are planning a trip to Italy. She still receives letters from David from prison. They are filled with self-pity, excuses, and pleas for her to forgive him and help him get early parole. She reads them, not with rage, but with a detached sadness. Dr. Sharma advised her, "Do not answer them until you are ready, and perhaps not at all. Your healing is paramount. His redemption is his own journey." Eleanor chose silence. She had paid her debt to David by sacrificing her life for him. Now she was paying her debt to herself by reclaiming her peace. She often thinks about the meaning of family now. It isn't determined by genetics or a shared name. It is forged in times of crisis, by actions, not words. Her family now consisted of Martha, who brought her comfort, Clara, who brought her order, Charles Lynn, who brought her justice, and Edward, who brought her joy. She had lost a son, but she had gained herself. She looked out at the Boston skyline from her living room, a view she cherished, and realized that her life was richer, more authentic, and more peaceful than it had ever been when she was living under the golden lie created by David and Jessica Vance. She survived the betrayal, endured the pain, and emerged not as the helpless victim in the ICU bed, but as the powerful, resilient woman who had exposed the darkness and demanded the light. The rebirth party had been a painful start, but her new life was the sweet, hard-won reward. The year following the trial and sentencing of David and Jessica Vance was not a period of simple recovery for Eleanor. It was an arduous, complex excavation of her own identity, a profound journey into the architecture of her former self, to understand where the foundational cracks had first appeared. The public victory, the sight of the judge's gavel affirming justice, had provided closure, but the emotional debris was vast and heavy. Eleanor had initially believed that confronting the betrayal and securing the convictions would free her entirely. Instead, she found herself haunted. The silence of her new Boston townhome, so carefully chosen to be free of the old house's ghost, often felt oppressive. She would wake in the dead of night, her heart hammering, the chilling image of Jessica's calculated precision with her own unconscious hand replaying on the inside of her eyelids. The grief for the son she had lost was a peculiar, malignant thing. It was not the straightforward, clean cut of death. It was the continuous, dull ache of amputation, the loss of a limb that was still technically present in the world, serving a prison sentence. She had to mourn the idea of David, the perfect, devoted man she had spent a lifetime nurturing, while simultaneously existing in a reality where the actual David was a callous, convicted criminal. Her weekly sessions with Dr. Sharma became Eleanor's lifeline. The psychologist gently guided her away from the self-blame that was constantly lurking at the edges of her mind. "You keep asking, 'Where did I fail?' Mrs. Vance," Dr. Sharma noted during one session. "But the question is flawed. You didn't fail. You loved. You gave. David and Jessica chose to take and to betray. We need to stop focusing on your giving and start focusing on your boundaries, doctors." Sharma introduced Eleanor to the concept of codependency, not in the dramatic sense, but the subtle, lifelong pattern of sacrificing one's own needs, dreams, and financial security to ensure the outward success and happiness of the child. David's sense of entitlement, Dr. Sharma explained, was inadvertently cultivated by Eleanor's absolute, unwavering self-denial. She had taught him, through action, that her own well-being was secondary to his comfort. "The greatest gift you can give yourself now, Eleanor," Dr. Sharma told her, "is to understand that your value is not tied to your capacity for sacrifice. Your new life must be built on the foundation of self-worth and clear, protective boundaries. You must become your own devoted daughter." This shift in perspective was revolutionary. Eleanor began to scrutinize her past choices, not with shame, but with critical analysis. She remembered turning down a prestigious teaching fellowship in London 30 years ago because David, then a teenager, had said he would miss his friends too much. She remembered postponing necessary roof repairs on the old house because David needed a down payment for a luxury apartment. It wasn't love, it was enabling. And the painful truth was that David and Jessica hadn't just stolen money, they had validated the dysfunctional dynamic Eleanor had allowed to exist for decades. The confrontation at the Colonial Hills Country Club had been the necessary surgical severance, a public declaration that the enabling had ended. Eleanor slowly began the tangible work of becoming her own devoted daughter. The first step was reclaiming her physical space. Her new townhome was already free of David's physical presence, but now she focused on injecting her own abandoned personality into every corner. She enrolled in a serious, intensive art program at the Museum of Fine Arts. She had always loved to paint watercolors, but David had once casually dismissed it as a quaint hobby for ladies who lunch. Now she found solace and fierce concentration in mixing pigments, the water flowing freely, the colors bold and defiant. Her art was no longer quaint, it was an expression of her renewed, unapologetic self. She also focused intensely on her finances, a task that, due to the trauma, had previously caused her immense anxiety. Clara, her sister, had initially managed everything, but Eleanor insisted on taking over. She attended workshops on investment diversification, spending hours with her financial advisor, demanding to understand every detail of her portfolio. She didn't trust anyone implicitly anymore, not even the bank manager, and that healthy skepticism became her new shield. The recovered $45,000 was invested conservatively, earmarked strictly for her own future travel and care. It was her money, for her life. Her relationship with Edward, the kind architect she had met, deepened. Edward was a quiet, steady presence who celebrated her strength rather than trying to soothe her pain. He listened patiently to the few, carefully chosen details she shared about the betrayal, never offering platitudes, only steadfast support. He made her feel seen as a woman, an intellectual, and a resilient survivor, not just as a tragic figure. But the most significant change occurred in the realm of her friendships. Martha, of course, was a given, a sister in all but blood. Yet Eleanor sought out new relationships, particularly with women who had experienced similar life-altering upheavals. She joined a support group Dr. Sharma recommended, specifically for survivors of elder financial abuse. It was in this group that Eleanor met Anne, a woman whose own daughter and son-in-law had successfully coerced her into signing over power of attorney and liquidating her retirement account. Anne was 2 years younger than Eleanor, but her story resonated deeply. The shared, visceral pain of being exploited by one's own offspring, the shame, the confusion, the isolation, created an immediate, intense bond. The worst part, Eleanor, Anne confessed one afternoon over tea, is not the money. It's the constant question, was I a bad mother? Did I raise a psychopath? I replay every disciplinary decision, every childhood reward, every conversation. Eleanor nodded, the question a familiar ghost. Dr. Sharma calls it the parental autopsy. We are programmed to believe that our children's failings are a reflection of our own, but we have to unlearn that. We have to see them not as our reflection, but as their own flawed, adult choice. This new community of survivors became a second form of therapy, a place where Eleanor could speak the unspeakable and receive validation instead of pity. They celebrated each other's small victories, the first full night's sleep, the first time checking a bank balance without a panic attack, the courage to block a manipulative letter from a prison inmate. The letters from David, were a persistent, corrosive force sent via the prison's monitored electronic mail system. They had evolved from tearful pleas for forgiveness to sharp, subtle attempts at emotional manipulation. "Mum, the lawyer is no good. If you would just write a letter to the parole board about my mistake and how I was confused during your illness, I could get out sooner and pay you back. I know you hate seeing your only son suffer. Don't let Jessica's influence ruin my life forever. Please, Mum, I need your help. I miss you." Eleanor would read them, her initial reaction still a tight coil of nausea, but the practiced analytical distance she had learned from Dr. Sharma kicked in. She saw the familiar entitlement, the complete lack of accountability, and the subtle guilt-tripping, all the hallmarks of the man she had exposed. He never truly apologized for the act of betrayal. He only apologized for the consequences he was now facing. She would discuss the letters with Dr. Sharma and then, most often, simply delete them. She had learned that engaging with his manipulation, even to refute it, was giving him power. Her silence was her boundary, her fortress. The one relationship that proved unexpectedly complicated was her bond with Martha, David's godmother. Martha had been Eleanor's fiercest defender during the confrontation, but as the months passed, Martha's maternal love for David began to clash painfully with her loyalty to Eleanor. "Eleanor, darling, I know what he did was monstrous, truly monstrous," Martha confessed one day, her eyes filled with conflict. "But he's in Walpole now, state prison. It's hard time. He's thin. He sounds broken. Can you not at least respond to his letters? Let him know you are thinking of him, that his mother hasn't completely abandoned him. He is still your son, Eleanor." Eleanor looked at her friend, her voice measured but firm. "He chose to sever that connection, Martha. Not me. He chose his greed over his mother's well-being. And if I respond now, while he is imprisoned, it sends a clear message that my love is still unconditional, even in the face of criminal betrayal, that I am still a resource he can manipulate. I spent a lifetime teaching him that lesson once. I will not teach it again." The rift was subtle but real. Martha continued to love Eleanor fiercely, but she also began to visit David in prison, bringing him books and listening to his pleas. Eleanor understood the conflict. Martha had no ownership over David's crime, only a long history of love. But she also recognized that their differing choices about David represented a fundamental difference in how they viewed the trauma. For Eleanor, the relationship with David was dead. For Martha, it was merely critically injured. Eleanor quietly accepted the distance this created, recognizing that her own healing required a ruthless devotion to her boundaries, even if it saddened her. 2 years after the trial, Eleanor felt strong enough to undertake the final symbolic act of severance, the sale of the remainder of her possessions from the old house. The stored boxes in her new condo's basement, the photos, the framed sports jerseys, the college memorabilia, were the last physical links to the life David Vance had almost destroyed. She organized a small private estate sale with a local auctioneer, ensuring none of David's specific items would be bought by any mutual acquaintances. When the auctioneer brought out the final box, the one containing all the childhood photos, Eleanor asked him to pause. She sat on the floor, surrounded by the remnants of a past life. She pulled out a faded photo of David at age 8, gap-toothed, holding a clumsily made wooden birdhouse he had crafted in Cub Scouts. He looked so innocent, so full of potential. A wave of overwhelming, raw grief washed over her, the pure, untainted sorrow for the child that was, before the entitlement and the greed had set in. She didn't fight the tears this time. She allowed herself to weep for the boy, for the mother she had been, and for the beautiful, fragile thing their relationship could have been. After 20 minutes, the catharsis passed. Eleanor stood up, wiped her eyes, and looked at the picture one last time. "Take it all," she told the auctioneer, her voice clear. "Sell it. I am ready to close that chapter." She used the modest proceeds from the sale to book a long-postponed, luxurious, 2-week cruise to the Mediterranean with Edward. It was a trip she had dreamed of taking with Robert, but David's financial needs had always intervened. This time, there were no excuses, no deferrals, no compromises. The cruise was transformative. Surrounded by the history of Italy and Greece, and bathed in the brilliant light of the Mediterranean sun, Eleanor felt the weight lift. She was not the victim of a family betrayal. She was a woman of 74, independent, admired, and in control of her own destiny. In the final session with Dr. Sharma before her trip, Eleanor articulated the profound lesson she had learned. "I finally understand, Doctor, that the greatest danger wasn't the theft. The greatest danger was the belief that my own existence was conditional on someone else's need. David and Jessica tried to define me by my capacity to be exploited, but I refused to accept their definition. I defined myself by my capacity to survive, to seek justice, and to find love that is authentic, not transactional." Dr. Sharma smiled warmly. "You are not just surviving, Eleanor. You are thriving. You took the most devastating betrayal and turned it into the foundation for the strongest version of yourself. That is the essence of true rebirth." Eleanor left Dr. Sharma's office that day, feeling an unfamiliar lightness. She was no longer running from the ghost of her past. She was embracing the vibrant reality of her future. She and Edward stood on the deck of the cruise ship, watching the sun set over the Aegean Sea. The air was warm, scented with salt and possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Edward asked, gently placing his arm around her shoulders. Eleanor leaned into his steady warmth. She thought about the security footage, the cold, hard evidence, the humiliation, the tears, the trial, the sentencing. She thought about the $150,000, the lost dream of her perfect son, the fractured relationship with Martha. "I'm thinking about love, Edward," she said finally, her voice soft but assured. "I'm thinking about the difference between the kind of love that demands sacrifice and the kind of love that demands honesty. I realized I had to lose the first to truly appreciate the second." She turned, looking back towards the distant lights of the mainland, toward the country that held her life, her history, and her incarcerated son. She made a silent vow. She would continue to live fully, without guilt, without looking back, allowing the legal system to handle David and Jessica's debt to society. Her only debt now was to herself. She had survived the darkness. And now she was stepping firmly into the light, a woman reborn, ready for whatever beauty and authenticity the rest of her life held. The painful story of her betrayal had ended, and the empowering chronicle of her resilient, self-determined life had truly begun.